In this video, we're going to cover the analytics pane. To get to the analytics pane, take your mouse over to the left side and you see the analytics next to the data pane. Click on the word analytics and that will bring up the analytics pane. In the analytics pane, we get a number of different features. We have reference lines, we've got forecasting and trend lines, and we can use these to assist us in creating views. Here's an example where I've got a bar chart showing sales over time by category. I could bring a reference line out to this. I can drop it either on the table, pane, or cell. In this case, I'll drop it on the pane. And in this window, we get to choose what that reference line represents. By default, Tableau says, let's take the measure you're using in the view, and let's just return an average of that across the pane. If you want to choose a different label, right now it says average, you could choose the value, or you could even choose a custom one. Insert some text there and then even insert um, something else if you want to. You could choose whether to show a line or include the line with a confidence interval, or even just show the confidence interval. And then you can modify your line. You could make it solid or dashed. You can choose the thickness and the color, the opacity. And then you can also choose your fill. So if you want to um, fill in below or above the line, you can choose the colors for that. And then there's also an option that you can select or deselect if you choose, and that is to recalculate the line if you select marks. So if you were to come in here and select maybe only these two marks, we'll get an adjusted reference line for that selection. Okay, the next feature I want to show is forecasting. For forecasting, you are going to need a time or a date field, and you'll bring that date field out and bring the forecast option, drag that out and release it. And Tableau uses a model called the Holt-Winters model. I don't know a lot about that, um, but you can right click on the forecast. And in the forecast option, you can select describe forecast. That will tell you how the forecast is being computed. You've got the summary, you've got the models there. You can also right click, go forecast and forecast options. And by default, Tableau is going to ignore the last period. So that would be a situation where maybe you have live data. If you're halfway through December, you don't want to let that incomplete month alter your forecast. So Tableau will ignore that. But if the data is complete, you can say, no, ignore zero, ignore the last zero, and Tableau will just forecast everything. You can also change how far out it'll forecast. In this case, it says next 13 months, but if you want to um, maybe bump that up to a couple years, you can try that. And then you can make adjustments to the model as well. You could say use seasonality or not, or you could even choose your trend and season. If you're deep into forecasting, you'll probably understand the different formats here. If you're not, I would recommend just sticking with the default. To get rid of a forecast, you can right click and just deselect show forecast. The next feature I want to show is the trend line. So if you have a scatter plot, it doesn't have to be a scatter plot. You could pull a trend line out over here, for example. But I like using trend lines on scatter plot. Just pull a trend line out and Tableau will let you choose which model you'd like. I'm going to select linear and we'll get a relationship for our trend line. You can hover over and see some of the basic model numbers, or you could even select describe trend line. That will bring up your P&T values, your standard error. And if you need more details, you can go to describe trend model. And that will give you more information about the trend line. And just like with the reference line, if you were to select other points, that trend line will recompute. Okay, now the next feature I want to show is clustering. I've got another scatter plot. This time it's sales and quantity, and I have product ID out there. So these are all the products I'm selling, how much I've sold on the y-axis, and how many of them I've sold on the x. Tableau has a cluster option. I'm going to drag that out, and Tableau is going to ask me what variables I want to cluster on. We could add more here if we want to, but I'm going to leave it to just these two. And we can also override the number of clusters. Um, Tableau is automatically going to cluster those using k-means clustering. If you want to say, actually, I want you to give me 6 clusters, you can insert that there. The cool thing about this cluster is we created on this chart, but we can use it in other parts of our workbook. I'm going to take this clusters field and drag it to my data pane. That's going to materialize that on my product ID as a group. So what I can do, let's go back over here. I'm going to remove the reference line. I'll drag the trend line off, and then I can put that cluster on my color. And I think that's awesome. Okay, the last feature I want to show um, on the analytics pane is a box plot. So to do that, I'm going to remove clusters from color. I'm also going to remove quantity, and then I'm going to bring out region and drop that on my column shelf. I'm going to change the mark type to a circle, and then I'll toggle back to the analytics pane, select box plot, and drag that out. I'll put it on cell. So within this menu, we can choose how far out we want our whiskers to go. Tableau is going to set that at 1.5 times the IQR, the inner quartile range by default, or we could say maximum extent of the data. Now this is a little bit wild. I'm going to select some of these marks and just filter them out. I'm also going to shrink the size because what that does is expose the actual box plot. So as you hover over the box plot, you can see the median, the upper and lower hinge, and the upper and lower whisker. So the analytics pane gives a lot of extra options for adding just a next level of depth when it comes to analytics and statistics.